And our last talk before the coffee break is going to be by Esther Stouthamer. She'll be talking about the Dutch National Scientific Research Program on land subsidence.
Okay, thank you, Enrique. Let's see. Yes, so this is a little bit a different presentation from all the others that you saw, because what I want to present you this afternoon is our National Scientific Research Program on land subsidence here in the Netherlands. And it's called Living on Soft Soils, which we do here in big parts of the country, as you all know now. Subsidence and society, and that's you will see that coming back. You have seen this logo in the top right corner. Oh, this is the wrong button. Yeah. You've seen this multiple times during this conference. So now I'm going to explain to you what it means, what it stands for. And of course, I give this presentation on behalf of a big group who has initiated this initiative and also designed this program. Well, first of all, the land subsidence situation in the Netherlands, I think by now you know all about it. So it's going on for a long time. It started already 2,000 years ago. At least we know that from then on, the near coastal areas started to be drained by the Romans. And it's still ongoing, as you've seen. And as you also see on the map in the left, typical subsidence rates are up to a few millimeters for the soft soil areas, the Holocene deposits, with Holocene deposits at the surface. But now we start to get problems, in the last years. So at some locations, current land use cannot be maintained anymore due to salinization and the risk of bursting of the upper layers due to the pressure seepage of the groundwater. It was also addressed by you, also regarding land subsidence. We do not have one specific problem owner, which always makes it difficult to cope with the problem. I think you will all recognize that. So what we actually need is action perspectives. So what can we do about it to mitigate land subsidence or to adapt to it? So the short-term consequences of this land subsidence are, and have been mentioned before, also by Peter Fokker. Of course, it creates damage to buildings and infrastructure, bursting of the top layer, which we also don't want, salinization of groundwater and surface water, but it also may influence land use and water quality, and of course the emission of greenhouse gases. At the same time, we also have some challenges, which we have in all deltaic areas around the world. Those are climate change, sea level rise we have to deal with. We have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And as you've also heard before, we have a shortage of housing, so we need to build more houses. So what are the consequences of land subsidence? It has been summarized here in this bar. So at this moment, over 1 million houses are threatened by foundation issues. Mandy talked about that. Over 22 billion euro will be the costs that are directly related to land subsidence, and that's cumulative until the year 2050, but it will be much more than this. So at this moment, we have twice as much costs for maintenance of streets and roads on soft soils, and due to mainly oxidation of the peat areas, we have a lot of CO2 emission. So what do we need? What do we need here in the Netherlands? So we need, first of all, we need proper knowledge to be able to make well-informed decisions for policy making. We also need good monitoring network. We need a good data infrastructure, the national scale, model tools, and of course we also need to link up with the information need of the knowledge users. So if we only write up everything in scientific papers, then it will not be implemented in practice, of course. We cannot expect that. And if we talk about measures or coping strategies, it's important to look into this into an integrated way. So we are striving for an integrated approach in which we combine technical measures, governance arrangements, and also the legislative framework, which could facilitate the implementation of measures. So what we actually need is the action perspectives again, and I think what's very important is that we need, and that's also a little bit what has been addressed in the beginning by Michiel, a clear vision on how we want to cope with land subsidence in the Netherlands and its effects. So we need a future goal, or maybe multiple future goals, and pathways to achieve that goal. So that's actually what we are also striving for in this project. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So the main aim of this project is to develop an integrative approach to achieve feasible and legitimate and sustainable solutions for managing the negative societal effects of land subsidence in the Netherlands. So what we strive for is knowledge-based, well-informed decision-making on land subsidence, action perspectives on the short, medium, and long term, and that integrative approach. So what does the program look like? What we've done when we were designing this program, we thought if we really want to get things done, and if we really want our knowledge to be used by knowledge users and to be implemented in practice, it's very important to link up with the policy makers. So therefore, in the setup of our program, we have loosely linked up with the so-called policy cycle. And so that's what you see here. And of course, it's a bit based on the 6M approach that has been presented by Gilles Erkens. So we have 4 work packages, as you see here. One is focused on measuring and monitoring. So on measuring how much surface deformation and subsurface deformation is going on. The second work package is focusing on the mechanisms, so the causes of land subsidence, the single individual processes, interactions between them, etc. The third work package is focused on the impacts. So what are the impacts and how much subsidence and impacts can we expect in the near future? And the fourth work package is focused around measures and, of course, the performance of measures. And so what we want to know is how can we best mitigate or adapt, and at what locations do we need to do what? And how good are these measures, and also how to integrate these technical governance-related and legislative measures. So we have started with the real research 2.5 years ago. So we're in a very nice stage of the project now, because in the beginning it's always a lot of investment. But now the first new real results start coming. And you've seen some of those without doubt, because we have many PhDs presenting their results during this conference. So the project will last until the end of 2026. And we have 11 PhD students working in this project and 5 postdoc researchers working in this project. And of course, Bernadine Thiehatten, maybe some of you have seen her, but she is the Trans-Academic Interface Manager. So that is the TIM. And she is responsible for really linking up with this knowledge users. So that's her responsibility to safeguard that. And we have a 5th work package, and that is focused on knowledge utilization specifically. So what kind of results, and I will go more into detail on that a little bit later. But what comes out of this program is, of course, knowledge, new techniques and methodologies, for example, regarding the INSAR processing, data, scenarios, models, and action perspectives. So, of course, all these the four scientific, so-called scientific work packages, they are linked to each other and feed into each other. So, for example, the measuring and monitoring work package that works on the processing of INSAR data, and by making use of temporal and spatial variation and trends in the INSAR data, that can learn us about the mechanisms, for example, for land subsidence. The other way around, to improve the INSAR processing, it's very important for Philip, Conroy, and Ramon to know about the exact subsidence processes and what they exactly contribute to total land subsidence. So these work packages feed into each other, and then the results of these two work packages, they are used in these two work packages on impact analysis and measures and governance approaches. Well, we have a whole team of researchers, the 11 PhD students and 5 postdocs. Well, here you see all of them. Most of them were here or are here still. And of course, the research team is much bigger than this, because most of these PhD students and postdocs have at least two supervisors. So we really have a nice team, I think, of approximately 50 people or so working in this project. Well, what kind of research activities do we perform in this LOS project? Well, we perform lab experiments and measurements. I will not mention them all, because then I need more time, but I will give examples. For example, we're doing experiments or measurements on the shrinkage behavior of clay and peat, and for that new lab setups have been built in Utrecht for the clay and in Wageningen for the peat measurements. So here you see a column experiment of Erne Blondeau. So she got a few from the field, very large peat cores, and in a climate-controlled room, she measured shrinkage of the peat, but also the emission of greenhouse gases. And first she dried it out, and then she re-wetted it again. Well, then we have field experiments and measurements. So, for example, Duiku Toluné, she's working on the microbial decomposition. I have to decomposition of peat. So what she did is she flipped the core so that now what was first below the groundwater is now near the surface in the unsaturated zone. So this gives you an idea of what happens if you drop the groundwater level, what happens with the microbial decomposition of the peat. And for maybe also good or nice to mention is that Erne from Wageningen University, she's working on the emissions, but she's also experimenting with different kinds of fertilizer and what that does mean for emissions, for example. Well, then we have, of course, a lot of data analysis, for instance, on the background subsidence to quantify that, the work by Kim de Wit. We're developing models on land subsidence, but also damage assessment. Mandy just mentioned the work of Alfonso. You see a nice figure of Alfonso here at the bottom, but also the economic model that was presented by Davy Verhoeven a few days ago. And then we identify and evaluate measures, both in the rural and in the urban area, and also the interaction of measures and environmental, societal, and economic challenges. And we develop model scenarios, for example, by combining different kinds of measures, and we define future scenarios. And then we also take into account policy or changes in policy and climate, etc. And based on that, we can develop pathways. I will say a bit more about that in a minute. Model outputs, governance approaches, and also we are studying the effective use of legal instruments and how we can optimize that for the mitigation of land subsidence. And also, our colleague from the law faculty is working on the liability for damages. These should be preferably be fair and equitable. This is our consortium, which I'm very happy with because I think we have the main, or let's say the key players in the Netherlands on board. And so the consortium consists of 3 universities, knowledge institutes, also 3. But the winner is also Wageningen University. But also we have 3 ministries involved, so it's the national governmental level. We have provinces on board, and we have municipalities on board. They are all united in this platform. But also some engineering companies and also the NAM, our gas extraction company in the Netherlands. So what we've also been thinking about is, well, how do we create real impact? That's something that we have written a plan for, a kind of a theory of change. And so we started from the impact side. So we defined our 2 main impacts. Well, the first one is that we want to raise the awareness of land subsidence, its impacts, but also the action perspective. So not only present it as a problem, but also that we can come up with solutions. And the second one is that that's actually our main impact. We want to achieve knowledge-based, well-informed decision making. So if you have defined the impacts, then you go back, then you have to think of research outcomes. So who does what to achieve impact? So who needs to do what differently compared to the current situation? And then you define the research outputs. Dus what is needed to be able to get to the outcomes and the impact from our loss project. So that's what I just mentioned, knowledge, techniques, forecast models, and action perspectives. And also by defining these steps, it's important to realize that there are always assumptions underlying here, so that you have to be aware of that. Well, this is what our theory, this is just a piece of it, but the theory of change looks like. I'm not going to mention it, but I only wanted to say here you recognize the outputs we have defined, and here the outcomes and the impact. This is impact 1, but for the outputs and the outcomes, we have also defined indicators, so we can see if we really achieved our goals, if we really have achieved a certain outcome, for example. So this is all part of the theory of change. Well, then I wanted to say something about knowledge utilization. So what are we going to do? So very brief. The project output will be a broad range of knowledge, and that needs, of course, to be integrated. So because in the end, what we aim for, so our ultimate aim is to support this informed decision making. And we want to do this by making the effects of the choices that can be made insightful. So what we have done already is identify desirable futures. So what do we strive for regarding land subsidence in the Netherlands? So you can think of business as usual. So if we do no intervention, but you can also think of we want to allow only 3 millimeter per year of subsidence, or we want to strive for the least damage. So that kind of futures. And the second step is then to, so what you have done then is here, defined. But what is the, I'm not sure if this is Danglish, so Dutch English, but the dot on the horizon. So what do we strive for? But this is where we are, of course. So what we need to know is how do we get from here, the present, to this future situation. So therefore, we have to identify pathways. So how do we get there? And then the third step is that we really have to follow these pathways to make the governance possibilities and restraints visible. And these pathways, in the end, they show what could be done in terms of technical measures, governance decisions, etc., to realize this desired future. I will skip this. This was about the pathways. Just to conclude, what outputs can we expect from this project? Well, it's not a complete list, but I think it gives a nice impression. It's a of course, it's a scientific project, so it's a lot of scientific knowledge. So think of new techniques to process INSER data. Think of identification or better parameters for land subsidence processes like creep, for example. So we can use that in our models. Think of typical shrinkage curves that are representative for certain areas in the Netherlands, or the effective use of legal instruments. A second part, it's also scientific, of course, is that we will come up with models, which will be a 1D and a 3D predictive land subsidence model, an economic model, damage assessment models, and societal cost-benefit analysis. All these pathways, there were also we also calculate what the societal cost-benefits will be. An overview of measures and performance of these measures for both the urban and rural areas. Data, of course, a lot of data, but I think the most important one is the last column. So what are we going to deliver for our knowledge users? Because we have to think very carefully of that. So what can they expect? Well, model outputs, model scenarios, so with a combination of measures. And together with this consortium, we also together define these scenarios and the combinations of measures. We will discuss this extensively with our stakeholder consortium partners. But also think of spatial forecasts for economic damage or pathways, governance approaches. For example, we are now investigating responsibilizing that approach, so making parties responsible for land subsidence. Liability for damages, cost-benefit ratios, for policy scenarios, and also a policy brief will be written based on the results of that. And we will come up with action perspectives, but also we will come up with some other things like emission factors for fertilized grasslands and risk factors, for example, for clay shrinkage. So this is a brief overview of our project. And if you want to know more, please there's now room to ask or time to ask questions. I think I'm looking to the chair, but else you can contact me or one of the many other researchers that are involved in this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, for this great framework. We have time for one question.
Yeah. Thank you for the nice presentation. Up to now, land subsidence, even shallow subsidence, or only shallow subsidence has been viewed as natural subsidence in the law. Is there any perspective that this will be changed soon into human-induced?
Yeah, well, I'm not a law person, but what I think is a very good development is the new policy that has been announced by the end of last year in the Netherlands. So the minister has announced that the soil and water system, that has to become steering. And that's a big change of thinking in the Netherlands, because we are all those, well, over 1,000 years, we are used to the idea that we in the landscape we can do everything at every location, but that's going to change now. So, and also this is meant, this policy, amongst others, to I think reduce land subsidence issues. So I think that's at least is a first step, and we will see what comes out of this this project, because we're also thinking of, it would be nice, of course, if it would be, how do you say this, implemented in a law or something like that. But the question is that needed, or can we combine this with other things like greenhouse gas emissions or so? So that is something that we have to look into. But it would be good if it would be done.
Yeah, because if it stays like it is now, nobody is responsible for the
No.
shallow subsidence.
No, no, no. But there have been discussions in the past already. If there should not come a minister, that so one person that is going to be made responsible for that. But of course, it's not a nice responsibility. But okay, yeah.
Well, let's thank Esther for this presentation.